welcome everyone to Limitless 2022. As Reza mentioned, this is an event where we will be sharing a lot of insights and learning from common experiences. Over the last, 4 or 5 years, consumers like you and I, the way we shop has totally changed. And what this has meant is that every entity in the entire ecosystem, whether it be the logistics company or the retailer or even the manufacturer, we have all had to adapt to ensure that we can meet these rising customer expectations. And that is at the center of a lot of the discussion points today. As we look around us, a lot of things have moved to being delivered at home, whether it be products or services. And this is something that has ensured that participants have had to upgrade in terms of technology and other aspects to meet these expectations. Some of the common points of discussion have been around sustainability, that how can logistics actually be more sustainable? How can we reduce carbon footprint? Also around scalability, with so many things moving to home delivery, package sizes reducing, frequency of ordering increasing. How can we scale logistics operations? More so, at the center of all of this, how can we still ensure that customer experience, the kind of visibility that customers need today, we can deliver that in a seamless manner and yet ensure that cost is under control. Keeping all this in mind, we need to also ensure that things like driver safety are taken care of, and overall, the logistics operations can get more and more efficient. These are some of the very interesting points that we will be covering today, and what has actually made logistics come to the forefront of a lot of the discussions, and how organizations are actually leveraging logistics to create a competitive advantage for themselves. In order to do this, we have a lot of people from esteemed organizations joining us today. I would like to start off the session by welcoming Sourabh is from Meesho. Meesho is now a household name, so needs no introduction, right? But Sourabh, I would hand it over to you. If you could give a quick introduction about yourself and Meesho, that would be great.
Thanks, Soham. I'm excited to be here. So I lead the fulfillment and experience function at Meesho. So let me first start with what Meesho is, right? I think Meesho started as a social commerce platform in 2015. And when we said social commerce, the whole idea was to enable a wave of entrepreneurs to come on board and get people who couldn't buy online directly because they had barriers in terms of understanding how apps work, or not having enough access to payment tools, and place orders for them, and at the same time earn a living for themselves, right? But over the last 12 months, Meesho has graduated into a full-blown e-commerce platform. And the way we operate is basically they're selling directly to customers, at the same time also having a flow where our resellers, or what we call the entrepreneurs, to keep participating on the platform, right? And what we believe is that while e-commerce has solved for high AOV and medium AOV products, the low AOV products is something that has not yet been cracked. And Meesho is trying to crack that market in terms of ensuring that the lowest price products become affordable for buying online. So, yeah.
Perfect. No, thanks a lot, Saurabh. That's very helpful. So I think it just, in terms of a lot of the things that you're mentioning, and, Meesho has become a full-fledged e-commerce company. I think one of the things that I think everyone wants to hear about is how critical is speed. A lot of it, there's a lot of talk around, even now 10-minute deliveries, right? But I think everyone wants to know how critical is speed, and essentially are customers also willing to pay a premium for these expedited deliveries? And kind of linked to this is, how does this strategy align with the strategy of positioning of inventory, right? Because and how what are some of the learnings from your side on these fronts?
Yeah, so I think speed is important. Let's be clear, right? Speed is important. It's just that where does it sit in relative priority for different customer segments and different categories? I think that's the question to answer. I think if you go into categories like grocery and categories like electronics, speed becomes probably the number one or number two item in terms of prioritization or in terms of the mind share of the customer, right? Because there you have limited SKUs, you want it quickly. And hence, I think grocery is a great example, right? We started with uh, deliveries happening the next day to move into slotted deliveries to same day deliveries to 90 deliveries and now down to 10, right? I think it's a fabulous example of how when you solve for speed for a category like that, you kind of get a very high ROI out of it because customer behavior changes. But then there are categories that formally that I believe are driven more by uh, width of selection and how much can you get, right? For example, fashion is a great example of it, right? So fashion and home products, when you look at them, what people want is a lot more choice. They are okay to compromise on speed to kind of get to get to that options of selection, because when this width increases, getting your inventory right is very, very difficult. It's almost impossible to get all the inventory at the right place at the right time to ensure that the speed levels of a grocery can be met, or for that matter electronics can be met. And hence the fundamental principle of design has to be, what category are you selling? Is that where speed matters? For example, grocery in my mind is P0 when it comes to speed, right? To moving to something like fashion and home products where selection matters a lot more, and hence compromising on speed is okay. And that is probably the segue into the overall inventory placement strategy also, right? And I think there are great examples, at least in the Indian context right now, there are great examples, right? The entire grocery market is moving into these micro clusters, and inventory accuracy at a micro cluster level has become very, very important. So you now don't want a city level demand, you don't want a zone level demand, but you want a micro cluster in the city to be defined, and you have to understand demand at that level, at a product level. And I think that is a very, very interesting problem statement that people are solving. However, and let's move one step ahead when it comes to mobiles and electronics and stuff where you have very clear SKUs defined, the width is not very high and the depth is very high. You kind of can get to a zonal kind of a demand to ensure that you create hubs, spots, and keep delivering, because you can't play a lot on pricing, you can't play a lot on selection. Everybody has everything. So what you play on is how can you deliver it quicker. Once you move away from these categories to these long tail categories of fashion and home, I think there the marketplace models, the pure marketplace models, I think are the way to go forward, because
Yeah.
again, in the customer's mindset, selection is very, very important. There'll be some curation and some head SKUs can still move into the same thing as the same model as what electronics are following. But I don't think that you can do it for a very large part of the selection.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, Saurabh, and because it does completely depend on the category, and especially like you mentioned for things like fashion and apparel, right, and as well as home related categories, selection is actually a lot more important, right? So makes sense, and I think depending on the category, this would change. Um, in terms of like the scale, right? And we all know that Misho has been scaling up very rapidly, right? And the numbers are humongous. And given that, in terms of the modus operandi, Misho is also working with a lot of third-party logistics companies, right? What are your views around scaling of logistics and operations overall for our country, and how it can kind of cater to the kind of volumes that companies like Misho are bringing to the table?
Very interesting question. So, and I think I'll probably take a bit of a detour and probably go back in terms of how the logistics systems has evolved, right? And I think if I go back, say 7, 8 years, I think when logistics was just being set up and this entire thing on customer experience was being developed, a lot of people building in-house logistics, right? And starting to set up things themselves because it made a lot of sense. The capabilities did not exist. People did not even understand what a national e-commerce logistics kind of looks like, right? And it was a complicated problem to solve for. And what was thought about, and a lot of knowledge that was given to us as part of our education has been, scale gives you economies of scale, give you better cost, and hence go for economies of scale and keep aggregating as much as you can and keep building these facilities larger and larger, make them more efficient, put in automation. I think that has served us really, really well, right? I think was V1 and that was needed for the industry to do. But in my mind, when we move forward from here, the whole thought process has to be not on economies of scale, but the concept of disaggregation working for us. And the
Right.
reason why
Right.
I believe disaggregation is the way to move forward is because I sincerely believe that a lot of small businesses will start coming online, right?
Yeah.
When these small businesses start coming online, they will not have access to these large facilities, which means logistics will have to adapt to serve these customers,
Right.
to serve these sellers. And that I believe is the problem to solve for. For example, in Meesho, when we started doing a lot of our first mile pickups, a lot of sellers who came on board were first time sellers. So
Right.
density of how much was being picked up per first mile pickup point started dropping. And the
Right.
traditional
Right.
systems didn't work because they were designed for aggregated loads, right?
Right. Right. Right.
So
Right.
I think that's a very, very important piece in terms of how do you get your logistics work in a disaggregated model. Can you break it down? Can you break
Right.
down your first mile into a small cluster and make it work in that cluster? Can you make sortation broken down and operate efficiently?
Yeah.
Because it also helps you manage flex very, very well, right? If you're in an industry which is probably growing at 10-12% a year, it's great to have these large facilities and keep investing in small this thing, right? But when an industry itself grows at 30, 40, 50%,
Yeah.
it's very difficult to predict demand. It's very pretty difficult to predict supply. And what happens when you get into these disaggregated models is you create flex at a very low cost.
Yeah.
B, you kind of de-risk yourself because facilities going down do not take your entire network down, but a part of the network down.
Yeah.
Creates redundancy in the system.
Yeah.
Having said that, it's a very, very difficult problem to solve. It's something that we are attempting to do right now to figure out how do we make these disaggregated models work. But I'll be very honest, it's a very, very difficult problem to solve.
Yeah, no, no, completely agree, Saurabh. And I think in terms of the approach, right, this has really changed because, when e-commerce started, back, 6, 7 years ago or even more, the thought process at the time was build in-house, right? Keep, creating these capabilities in-house. But it's very interesting and refreshing to actually see this approach from Misho coming to the table. Also, I believe that in countries around, right, it actually supports entrepreneurship, right? Having these kind of disaggregated models allows for smaller and smaller entrepreneurs, not just sellers, but also, let's say, if somebody just wants to do, say, pickups or deliveries, right? So I think we can even support, entrepreneurs from that perspective.
Absolutely, Soham. And I think this is very interesting, right? The way I think about it, that to create an end-to-end logistics ecosystem now in the country, if you want to create a new one, the barrier to entry is only becoming harder and harder, especially on the capital side. Because now you're competing with scaled logistics, which have a cost advantage. Your customers or the people that you're
Yeah,
trying to serve would want those cost advantages to be passed on to you, which means the amount of capital that you might need to kind of set up a logistics company today
yeah,
might be X, might have been 0.1X 7, 8 years ago, is X
yeah,
now. And I
yeah,
think in 5 years down the line, it has to be 5X. And
yeah,
hence,
yeah,
this local entrepreneurship, how do you get that on board and how do you make it
yeah,
work, is the
yeah.
way to scale the industry further.
Absolutely. No, completely agree, Saurabh. I would just want to tell the audience that please put in your questions in the Q&A section. We would love to take them up as we go through this discussion. We don't need to leave it for later, but please keep posting it over there. And we'd love to take them up as we go through this discussion. Perfect, Saurabh. I think so. Just on that note of cost that you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
I think definitely the other thing that everyone is really thinking about is that while customers are really expecting all of these things, right? Speed,
Mhm.
selection, all these different things. Um, what is your thought around reducing the cost of logistics, right?
Mhm.
Especially when we look at the last mile and any other components that you feel form a large part of the cost of logistics, and what can players, whether it be retailers or logistics companies, what are some of the things that they can do to reduce costs?
Yeah, I think when you look at cost, right? I look at cost as two things. There is a cost of experience and there is a cost of inefficiencies, right? Now, when you say cost of experience, and experience can be different tiered graded, right? You can airship a lot of stuff and you can have white glove delivery as a solution, which is available for you. And you can create that. And you need that experience, by the way. That market, I believe, is going to be small, but it's going to be a super profitable market for the logistics industry because there is a bunch of customers who will need it. You want to buy an iPhone, you would want that kind of experience, right? I ordered it at 3 p.m. It's there at my doorstep at 7 a.m. next morning. I have this white glove guy who has come in. And these are products where you have margins to afford a service like that. So that is something that will exist and people will pay for it. I think then there is going to be this mass segment, which is going to be, I'm okay with say 2, 3 delivery, the guy wearing a simple uniform and coming in, not a white glove, right? But that guy comes in, delivers, is behaving with me properly and all of that, right? And I think that is going to be the second segment. Uh, Today, unfortunately, the way we look at it is we try to optimize prices in this segment to say that how can I cut these experience costs and bring it down? And there was an interesting point that you made in your opening address, right? Which was driver safety. One of the things that people actually go back and say is, hey, can I reduce certain things? And which is in your P&L item shows up as benefits to the driver or rider or whatever, right? Can I remove these line items and will it make my P&L look better? But these are inputs into cost of experience. And in my mind, those should never be tinkered with. But there is a large part which sits in cost of inefficiency. And that is the segment that at least the logistics industries needs to target and solve for, right? The first one, and I know this is a slightly controversial point to make, but the point is that there are RTOs in the system. And RTOs are caused both by the customers who are booking those orders as well as our last mile agents, right? How do you bring these two together, make them work together, create more data in the ecosystem so that this inefficiency can be killed? I think second, if you look at the problem of last mile experience, failed deliveries, a lot of it is driven because of operational inefficiencies that we've built in the system. Because we have thought about, hey, an early morning delivery is maybe not as important. I can keep taking my deliveries out till 11 a.m., 12 noon, right? But your customers have left for office or are at some work where they can't afford to do this, right? So I think third is payment solutions. For example, a lot of efficiency can be built in if you create multiple payment solutions at the last mile delivery point. Now, there is great work happening in this space, but have we done enough? No. I think there is a lot more that needs to happen to ensure that the adoption rises. It's still a very expensive option for people to choose for because we are charging them money for doing it, right? UPI is free, but there are charges that get charged to the customer to do it. So I think there are these inefficiencies which are there, which need to be targeted and which need to be reduced, because that is what will drive the overall cost down. Because if you start hurting and if you start focusing on the cost of experience, I think what we
Yeah.
will see is that the top of the funnel will drop. The demand will drop because if you don't provide the right experience that the customer is expecting, they'll stop buying.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely, Saurav. I completely agree. And it's easier actually to solve for the cost of experience, right? It's a more straightforward thing to just reduce that, but it's much more difficult to solve for the inefficiency. One of the things, and these are a couple of the questions that have come in from the audience over here, is actually kind of around this, where let's say in countries like Australia, right, where the manpower cost is a lot higher, because in India that's probably not an issue, right? But what are some of the strategies
Yep.
again that can be used in countries like this where manpower cost itself is high, right? Maybe how we can again, on the operational efficiency front, what are the things, specific things perhaps that we could do? And second is, in general, again, manpower and drivers are at the center
Yep.
of a lot of the things, right? um, and absence of that leads to failure of the entire setup. So how can we solve for the supply problem as well as we scale up? So these are the two questions that have come up.
All right. So let me take this example of the high cost last mile manpower or the cost of labor being very high, right? I think it's a problem for everyone to solve, not just the where the cost of labor is high, simply because everybody would want their products to become more and more affordable, right? So it also relates to the uh, purchasing parity that exists in these countries. So I think one interesting thing, and by the way, if I look at the ecosystem across the world, I think China has solved it really, really well, is how do you make the customer and the seller who use logistics as a service as part of the network itself? For example, self pickup is a very large part of the business that happens in China. And the reason why it happens very, very well in China is because there is a large adoption for it. And the reason
Yeah.
why it happened was people found products cheaper there. However, they could not get deliveries. So this entire thing kind of solved it, all came together, right? So in my mind, how do you create these pickups very make these pickups A, convenient for the customer, and B, pass on the benefit to the customer, which means the customer sees value in doing it, is an important part of how you can get the entire cost down. Second, and this is where it's important, and I spoke about disaggregation earlier, at least for a
Yeah.
country like India, where I believe this, where this is, I think automation will play a large part, at least in certain parts of this thing, right? Sortation, for example, in high cost markets, it's important to do uh, a lot of automation because that brings your cost down, right? Uh, I am never a fan of 100% automation. Semi-automation is the path that I think is the right way because it leaves you with some flexibility and does not tie you to demand. And maybe, but it's also my mindset in terms of how I've seen it to be failing sometimes when you make it too rigid. But I think those are two things that I think about. How do you get the sellers and the customers to participate as part of the logistics network and bring the cost down? And B, how do you bring in automation a lot more to solve these problems?
Yeah. I think one of the other thing, Saurabh, is in terms of again, really having more people get involved in solving for supply problems, right? I think one of the interesting things are there are a lot of parallel supply chains that are existing,
Yeah.
right? And what are your thoughts on how some of these supply chains, which some of them deliver early in the morning, some are say lunch focused, some are let's say around the day, some are let's say in the night, right? How can some of these kind of independent supply chains also be leveraged to kind of solve for some of the manpower supply problems and even actually reduce cost?
Great question, Soben. Great thought, right? So when I look at logistics as a overall ecosystem, it's a factor of three things. It's a factor of geography. It is a factor of capability, operational capability of what operations can you do, and it's a factor of technology. What technology do you have to do these operations, right? If you can somehow bring all of these three together for all these different supply chains that you spoke about, let's talk about hyperlocal and 10-minute grocery delivery kind of an ecosystem, right? It operates in a certain geography. The delivery boy is supposed to be in that geography, right? Food delivery is a slightly bigger geography, but the same concept exists. Today, e-commerce cannot tap into this ecosystem because the geography cross operations is, while they have the same operations capability, they don't have the tech and geography meeting. The moment you bring all these three together and there is a cohesion that happens between these three, all these supply chains will become clearly reusable, right? And that will bring cost down significantly. A, it will take up the earning potential of the rider a lot up, and it will also bring down costs because for the same per delivery, and because you're improving utilization, you can pay lower. However, the earning potential has actually gone up. And I think it's a game of two things, right? A, e-commerce needs to get to that certain density within that small pocket, and B, the quick commerce slash food delivery needs to expand to a larger geography that hasn't happened. But when these two come through, I do see that will happen and has to happen because that will bring in a lot of efficiencies to both the quick
Yeah.
commerce as well as the e-commerce ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think things like even say the dairy supply chain, right, which operates at a very specific time of the day. I think a lot of times players can also use that capacity to
Yep.
do things more. So even say logistics companies, right, a lot of them work on say a franchise model, right? Now these things like what you mentioned in terms of hyper local, right, those can be additional earning opportunities for the manpower. And I think this is one of the ways in which it can be made completely very inclusive, have a lot of people join in this, right, and then really also then reduce the cost.
Yep.
So in terms of overall, right, we have a lot of logistics companies that are part of the audience today, Saurabh. So, one of the things is, in terms of making things more environmentally sustainable, right? So that's one of the questions that actually came up from the audience as well, right? So, what are some of the thoughts from that perspective, whether you are a logistics company or if you're a retailer? What are some of the initiatives or measures that, let's say, you think could be taken up to make logistics more sustainable?
Yeah. So I think let's look at where we are wasteful, right? Or where we don't contribute to sustainability. I think, one, the distance traveled for each parcel is very, very high today. right? How do you bring that down? And this is where the retailers and the logistics companies need to come together. Smart inventory placement, uh, joined with finding the right demand shaping initiatives. As I said, you need to have all these supply chains, all these inventory placement strategies in place, right? But when you can't place the inventory very close to the customer. What you can do is you can demand shape the customer's behavior to say that, hey, you want to buy this. I have very similar products very close to you. Why don't you buy this? Which means you reduce the distance traveled uh, in the ecosystem, which is one very big way of driving this, right? I think the second one is uh, and I think it's also a factor of the industry maturing, is the entire EV ecosystem developing, right? And there are a lot of initiatives that are being taken by a lot of firms right now. The problem is the way the industry is structured today and the products that are available, the vehicles that have come up right now, at least in the EV space, do not solve for a lot of large use cases. They started solving for very small use cases, but that there is very rapid progress that is happening in that ecosystem. And I think what's also coming through very clearly is that this is cheaper than what we've been doing till date,
Yeah.
which means there is a cost goodness that will come to the ecosystem if we adopt to it, right? I think this is
Yeah.
the second one. And the third one is how do you reduce packaging? And I think this is a
Yeah.
very, very interesting one, right? And again, very, very interesting solves that have come up. For example, there are retailers who go towards consolidation a lot more to say, how can I put more items in a package? And it's a very, very good way to save money again, because you're reducing the number of
Yeah.
packages, right? So I think there is a uh, misconception that sustainability and cost don't go hand in hand. I
Yeah.
strongly believe they do. It's finding the right solutions and investing behind them to do it. These are difficult
Yeah.
problems to solve. But as I
Yeah.
spoke about the cost of inefficiency, difficult problems are the ones that give you the highest ROI.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, um, honestly, as an industry, cost, according to me, would be the number one driver to take things towards sustainability. And that is also actually something that would happen very soon. We have seen, whether it be last mile logistics, etc., we have seen how people in their optimization or in their planning, they give priority to electric vehicles, right? Which is actually a much lesser cost. So you utilize that fleet first. Not just that, in let's say a smaller radius of let's say 1 kilometer or 1 mile, how can you actually have people go on bicycles, right? Or even let's say walking, right? So these are some of the other things that we have also seen, and essentially at the center of all of this is what you correctly called the semi automation, right? How can we guide the humans to actually prioritize these kind of things through some sort of form of automation? So these are great points, Saurabh. One of the interesting things you mentioned is the metric of distance, right? Distance traveled per package. Um, could you shed some light on how do you measure it as a leader? How do you measure it? And are there, let's say, if you were to make your sustainability dashboard, right? What are some of the other metrics that would be on it?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that we measure, so let me start with distance first. It's an easy one to do because we exactly know the source pin code and the destination pin code that the shipment is going to. So we know each shipment, how many kilometers has it traveled. And our month on month target is how do I bring it down? It's both a cost lever because as you reduce the distance, your cost does come down, and it adds to sustainability. The second one that we measure from a sustainability point of view is items per packet, right? How many items are going in a single packet and how do we keep increasing that, right? How do we shape the customer behavior to buy a lot more from probably the same seller who's selling the product, or for inventory lying in the same warehouses and all of this? I think this is a very, very important part, right? I think the third one, which is a very interesting problem to solve, and we work with our partners very closely to do this, is to say, how can I club last mile deliveries? While I might not have been able to consolidate at first mile, can I do it at the last mile? So can I ensure that if there are X number of packets that are going to a certain customer, they all reach the last mile almost at the same time, or are put on hold at the last mile till the other packets come in, so that they can go out for delivery at the same time, which ideally again reduces cost for the ecosystem, but also ensures that you're not making 6 trips to go to that person, but doing 1 trip, right? I think these are few levers that you kind of put in, and these are the things that we measure. And there are more things that we want to do. I don't think that we are there yet. For example, because we are running a 3PL ecosystem today, we don't have an EV goal right now, but we work with our partners to understand what their goals are and figuring that out. But it does not directly feature into our sustainability dashboard at this point of time.
Yeah. No, makes sense, Saurabh. And I mean, just on that note, you mentioned that Misho does work with a lot of partners from a logistics perspective, and that is only going to grow as the disaggregation model that you spoke about will grow, right? And we have a lot of logistics companies in the audience as well. What would be some words of advice from your side for them, as they go through this journey in terms of handling the scale and also ensuring customer experience?
Okay, I think the the biggest uh, probably input that I can give to the entire ecosystem is there was a time where competing made us grow because everyone was developing new solutions and there was this thing, right? But at least we are in the current market scenario, at least in India, we're in a place where we have developed the ecosystem a lot and competition will not lead us forward, right? It's collaboration that will lead us forward, right? What you have to understand is there are large national logistics players who have been created who are doing a great job, right? But the barrier to entry to create national logistics is very, very difficult. So you need to gain deep expertise in one area. So for example, if you are based out of Surat or Delhi or Jaipur, one of these big first mile hubs, and you're great, you have a fleet of vehicles, you can do great first mile logistics, go very deep into that experience. But then collaborate with somebody who can do sortation, who can do middle mile, who can do last mile, because then the entire network opens up to you. So what people have tried to do is if there are say 60 rupees per delivery available in the market as revenue, everybody has tried to go and capture that market saying that I want this entire 60 rupees. But now the time has come that if new players want to really play in the market and ensure that they're able to compete, is to say, if I was to take 10% of the 10% market share of the 60 rupees, I would have earned 6 rupees of the total available pie, right? However, if I take uh, 10 rupees out of the 60, but I get 60% of this market share, I still earn that 6 rupees. So I think that philosophy of how do you look at that revenue potential and how do you look at how much revenue can I earn has to change and has to come in saying, I know this operations, I'm an expert at this, I can beat everyone on experience and cost in this. Let me go very deep, build my expertise here and build that out, right? And let me own this. But then I'll collaborate with people who can do the other parts so that for the end consumer, like a Meesho, the entire solution is available. And I'm not dealing with this part sitting somewhere and not speaking to the other parts, right? And that's why I believe that collaboration is going to be the way forward for the logistics industry to build the next wave of what is needed for e-commerce to grow and for online commerce to grow.
No, absolutely, Saurabh, and I think in some of the established industry, especially let's say even passenger travel for that matter, right? You see a lot of collaboration, between say airlines or carriers, right? And it's been going on forever, right? So if there is a certain route where there's code sharing that happens, right? So a lot of these things do exist even in say shipping, right? You have if there is certain capacity that is being there, how you can share and how you can collaborate and leverage, and of course each one has their strengths, right? One of the questions that actually was a follow-up to your point on the distance, right? So one of the attendees is asking, how can you shed more light on how Misho is specifically reducing the distance of each package,
Hmm.
and what were the initiatives that brought about maximum saving? Right, so just some learnings or insights from that perspective.
Yeah, so I think we have one which is going on right now. So there are two ways to solve distance, right? One, take the product that the customer wants very close to the customer, and this is typically done through warehousing. Now, and let's be for Misho's ecosystem, which typically deals with long tail. We deal with a lot of unbranded products. We deal with a lot of with-based categories like fashion, home. These are very large contributors to our business. It's very difficult to predict. So one way of reducing distance, which is to say, how do I take the top selling products and place it very, very close to the demand centers? And you can do it fairly accurately in this current scenario because you're dealing with very limited SKUs. So it becomes similar to an electronic supply chain, right? I think the second one, which is the interesting one, is that how do you demand shape customers to buy products similar to what they were looking for? And that is, and fortunately, e-commerce has this advantage of showing what they want to the customers, right? And can you put that? The customer wants a certain product. Say, I'm wearing a blue shirt. I have this blue shirt from a brand X available, but I have a similar blue shirt available from brand Y. I don't think it matters a lot to me whether it was brand X or brand Y. But if I had shown the same product there, maybe the purchase decision would have still happened. So I think the second one is demand shaping. And for us, at least for players who are dealing in these long tail, this demand shaping approach is what needs to be solved for a lot more, because the largest impact will come from here. It's a very, very tricky thing to solve, right? If you go and
Yeah.
speak to your revenue growth team, or you speak to your team which manages listings, they would freak out if you hear it. But then this is the way to reduce this. And this is something that builds into the pricing very, very well, because it reduces cost. And
Yeah.
hence your incentives aligned to solve this. But I believe that demand shaping for long tail, inventory placement for more concentrated, high depth SKUs is the way to go about it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, maybe one of the other things, right, that can perhaps save on distance is reducing the total number of attempts it takes to complete the delivery, right?
Yeah.
Because doing two attempts versus in one attempt, right? So any thoughts on that? What are some of the strategies to reduce the total attempts taken to make a delivery?
Yeah. So I think there are 3 or 4 things, right? The first one is obviously operational rigor. If you can do the same thing day in, day out, every day, so that your customers who are in your area know that this is how this will happen, I think that gives a very, very clear picture. So if you can adhere to if you can create a sustained promise and adhere to it day in and day out, it will reduce the number of attempts. It's something that's bound to happen. Apart from this, I think the one more thing that I spoke about earlier was payment options, because COD is very, very heavily used in this in India, at least right now. And I know it's something that has percolated to certain to other parts of the world as well. How do you ensure that you create more payment options, because cash availability is a problem, right? I think the third one is around communicating well with the customer.
Yeah.
How do you ensure you pass on the right communication at the right point of time, so that the customer knows that this is happening, right? Today, people have solved it, and I think there are very decent solves in the market, but I think there is still some way to go, right?
Yeah.
Channels of communication and all of this can be figured out a little bit. And I think the last one, which is important, is to ensure that you create a lot of controls in terms of understanding fake, understanding if there is behaviors which are not in line with what is expected,
Correct.
because then that can drive a lot of rider behavior as well, right? And I'm a firm believer of incentivization. If you create the right incentives, those automatically happen, but tech is an enabler to ensure that the incentives get paid out to the right people.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, this aspect of bringing in intelligence is just super critical, because it again goes into that kind of semi-automation mode, right? Where humans can be enabled with automation to perform better actions. I think we have time for one last question. And just on this note, right, one of the questions is that, how can AI and blockchain be used in logistics? And what are some of the things in your mind, sort of, if maybe not now, but let's say even in the near future, what are some of the use cases it can be used for?
Oh, okay. So I'm not an expert on blockchain, so I leave that out for now. And I don't have a lot of views in terms of how that would come in. I think there are a lot of use cases in the B2B space where blockchain will be very, very handy. I am worked on B2C a lot more, so that's what I would know. But let's talk about AI, right? I think the biggest one that I see is address intelligence. A lot of information today, and again, I'll speak about India as a country, and there are other countries which are very similar to India in the Southeast Asian market, where addresses are not very structured. How do you ensure that you use AI to kind of convert addresses into something which can be made a lot more user friendly, right? And the thing is that yes, people have moved to lat longs and whatnot. Customers don't understand lat longs, right? How do you ensure you use that and convert this into a lat long and provide that information? I think that's a very, very strong lever that will go into building the next wave of efficiency into the ecosystem, right? Second one is obviously, and this has to be combined with location services to kind of build that out. I think the second one, which is interesting, is can you use this information and convert it into customer behavior models, right? While it's the job of the retailers and not majorly the logistics company, I think there's a lot of input. So today, for example, all retailers struggle with not having a great quality of information to take right decisions. But the logistics industry is what can provide that information and an intelligence built on top of it, which says, hey, I have these models which tell us that this is what is happening. These customers are defrauding you, are creating ecosystems where there is wrong behavior being driven, feeding into the models that retailers create. Again, there is collaboration that is needed to solve this. But I think these are two big areas where we can see AI playing a large part, right? Because we're dealing with
Yeah.
far too much information and far too much disaggregated information to make sense of it outside that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Sort of, I think that's great. And, blockchain perhaps, sometime in the future, maybe we'd be able to see the sourcing of the products from Misho also, right? On the package, just like on a Nike shoe, we're
Yeah.
able to see how it is sourced. And let's say even things like defining how much distance it traveled, right? I think because with consumers demanding more and more, to know where their products are sourced, how they're sourced, what is the sustainability, carbon footprint, right?
Yeah.
I think all of these are great initiatives. Yeah, we wish Meesho the very best. The growth, it's been an inspiration to many. The scale and the pace at which it has grown. And then now it's challenging Amazon's, Flipkart's, everyone, right? And it's great to see the kind of progress that is there, right? And it's one big ecosystem. And I think collaboration is the way forward. And that's a clear message to everyone. Thanks again, Saurabh.